Our story begins in a high-security Russian prison. An unidentified man was meditating and mentally preparing himself because he was about to participate in a fight in the prison arena. When the guard called him, we learned that his name was Yuri Boyka. After this, the events shift to George Chambers. George was a former world champion in boxing who had retired years ago. He was forced to work on advertisements in Russia to earn money and survive, but he was frustrated because he didn't know how to speak Russian. His manager told him to endure it because if he lost his job, he would go bankrupt and wouldn't be able to eat. Reluctantly, George agreed to the job. Meanwhile, a young boy was delivering food to a businessman named Gaga. Gaga was organizing prison fights and earning money from bets, but he hated Boyka because Boyka kept winning all the matches, causing him losses. Gaga prepared for Boyka's fight, and Boyka entered the prison arena amidst loud cheers from the inmates. At the start of the match, Boyka mercilessly dominated his opponent because he was a professional in mixed martial arts and could deliver deadly strikes using his legs. In the end, Boyka landed a flying kick that knocked his opponent unconscious, winning the match. Gaga, furious, vowed to find a strong fighter to defeat Boyka, no matter the cost. At the same time, George Chambers was heading home in a taxi, unaware that criminals had broken into his hotel room and planted illegal substances there. As soon as he arrived, his manager wanted to discuss work, but George ignored him, saying he wanted to rest. When George entered his room, he was shocked to find the criminals there. He managed to fight them off because he was a professional boxer, but in the end, they overpowered him and knocked him out. Shortly after, the police arrived, and during their search of the room, they found the illegal substances. George was shocked and kept insisting he was innocent, but it was no use. The next day, he was sent to a high-security Russian prison. After hours of travel, George Chambers finally entered the prison. All the inmates were surprised to see the former world boxing champion there. Boyka even challenged him, staring into his eyes for several minutes like a hawk. George then met the prison warden, who told him that all inmates were treated equally and that he wouldn't receive special treatment just because he was a former world champion. George said he would contact his manager to get him out of prison as soon as possible. Later, the guards gave George his new prison clothes and took him to shower and prepare for his cell. However, he refused to shower because the water was too cold. The guards got angry and attacked him fiercely, but George was quick and took them down one by one. The head guard called for backup, and eventually, George was forced to shower under the cold water. When George entered his cell, all the inmates watched him. One of them even spat water at him and said Boyka would crush him. George choked him and was about to kill him, but the guards intervened just in time. Once inside his cell, George washed his face and refused to speak to his cellmate. The next morning, George went to the cafeteria for breakfast. As soon as the inmates saw him, they fell silent and watched him from a distance, avoiding any interaction. His cellmate introduced himself as Stephen Parker, but suddenly, Boyka appeared with his followers. All the inmates stood up in respect except George, who kept eating. One of Boyka's followers demanded that George stand up without saying a word. George got angry and beats him up. Boyka then told him, "You may be a former world champion, but in this prison, I'm the strongest fighter." The two clashed, destroying the place in the process. The warden got angry and ordered the guards to break up the fight immediately. After the scuffle, Boyka kept telling the warden to let him finish George off, but the warden ordered him to save his energy for the arena. Meanwhile, George felt despair because his manager couldn't get him out of prison, and he might have to stay there for a full month. It was then revealed that the businessman, Gaga, had framed George by planting illegal substances in his room and getting him imprisoned so he could fight Boyka and defeat him. Gaga had also bribed the warden to make sure George and Boyka hated each other, ensuring a destructive fight that would bring in a lot of money. While George was walking in the prison yard, he noticed Boyka's gang surrounding his cellmate, Stephen, and attacking him from all sides. George stepped in like a lion and took them down one by one. However, after saving Stephen, he discovered that Stephen was addicted to illegal substances and had gotten himself into serious trouble. Boyka, furious at seeing his followers injured, told George, "If I meet you in the prison ring, I won't show you any mercy." George punched him and the two clashed again, but the guards intervened at the last moment. The next day, Boyka prepared for another fight in the arena. As usual, he dominated his opponent and completely destroyed him. George watched the match and was amazed by Boyka's incredible skills in mixed martial arts. After Boyka won, he looked George in the eyes and said, "Your turn is next." When George was resting in his cell, the guards asked him to speak with the warden, but he refused. They tried to force him, and George ended up breaking their bones, leading to dozens of guards gathering to control him. They eventually threw him into a dark cell. The warden told George that if he wanted to get out, he would have to fight Boyka in a face-to-face match. George refused, saying he would never participate in prison fights because they were too violent and illegal. The warden, angry at his refusal, ordered the guards to take him to the sewers to work there. George didn't want to clean the sewers, but the guards humiliated him and threatened his life. Suddenly, an old man of unknown identity intervened and stopped the guards. He told George to work quietly instead of causing harm to himself. George complied and completed his tasks without any issues. Afterward, he went to the old man and thanked him for saving him. While George was cleaning himself up, his cellmate, Stephen, told him that the old man's name was Krot and that he had been a special operations officer before being imprisoned. In the middle of the night, while all the inmates were asleep, Stephen met with Boyka's followers to get illegal substances from them. However, they humiliated him and demanded that he convince George to accept Boyka's challenge or they would finish him off completely. Later, they set a trap for George while he was on his way to work. They tried to ambush him, but George skillfully fought back. However, they outnumbered him and surrounded him from all sides. Just then, Krot appeared and used his martial arts skills to help George. Together, they took down Boyka's followers and taught them a lesson. Unfortunately, the guards arrested George and threw him into an underground cell filled with filthy water, leaving him in complete darkness. George spent long days in the cold without food or water until he became sick and his health deteriorated. Suddenly, Krot appeared and gave him food and medicine. George was surprised and didn't understand why Krot was helping him. Krot explained that the only way for George to get out of this cursed prison was to fight Boyka. If he refused, he would remain in prison forever. After a short while, the guards brought George out of the underground cell. When he arrived in the prison yard, he was surprised to see a beautiful table set with delicious food. Then, Gaga appeared and welcomed George. Gaga revealed that he was the one who had orchestrated George's imprisonment, and his goal from the beginning was to set up a fight between George and Boyka. George became furious and tried to attack Gaga, but Gaga's guards surrounded him from all sides. At first, George said he would get out of prison and return to America because his manager would hire a lawyer for him. However, Gaga revealed an unexpected surprise. George's manager was working with him and had known everything from the start. George was shocked and realized that the only way out of the prison was to fight Boyka face to face. Reluctantly, George agreed to the match. Even his cellmate, Stephen, was surprised and couldn't believe George would fight the strongest fighter in the prison. The next day, George and Stephen went to the training yard to prepare for the fight. As soon as Boyka saw George, he said he wouldn't show any mercy and would finish him completely. From that moment, George trained with Stephen day and night to improve his boxing skills, while Boyka perfected his deadly leg strikes, which seemed unstoppable. During the training, Stephen continued to use his illegal substances. Boyka's followers then approached him and demanded that he help them drug George during the fight, which would prevent him from accessing his substances. The match between George and Boyka began, and the announcer introduced them to all the inmates. At first, Boyka told George that he would only use his hands to prove that he was as skilled in boxing as George. As soon as the bell rang, the two clashed fiercely, but George dominated because Boyka was only using his hands. Meanwhile, the treacherous Stephen switched George's water bottle with another one containing a sedative to weaken him. During the fight, Boyka struggled because he had promised not to use his legs, and George, being the former world boxing champion, dominated the match. However, after Boyka fell to the ground, he got back up and started using his legs, delivering devastating kicks to George. George was shocked by Boyka's incredible speed and barely managed to defend himself until the bell for the first round rang. At the start of the second round, Stephen handed George the sedative-laced water bottle, and George drank from it. Soon after, George lost control and couldn't see clearly. Boyka seized the opportunity and attacked him mercilessly, knocking him to the ground with lightning speed and easily winning the match. After the fight, George woke up in the hospital, where Krot told him that his friend Stephen had betrayed him and drugged him. Enraged, George went to confront Stephen and punish him for what he had done. But when he reached the cell, he discovered that Stephen had taken his own life out of shame for betraying his only friend. The next morning during breakfast, George told Boyka that he was a weak fighter because he had drugged him to win the match. Boyka was confused because he didn't know about the sedative in the water. George then went to the warden and told him that he was responsible for everything that had happened, delivering a powerful punch to him. Even Boyka was surprised by George's actions and didn't understand why he was doing this. Unfortunately, George was left hanging in the snow as punishment for hitting the warden. Meanwhile, Boyka spoke to his followers and told them he didn't need their help to defeat George because he was the strongest fighter in the world. He then punished the two followers who had put the sedative in the water. At the same time, George was freezing from the cold after being left in the prison yard for hours. A group of inmates gathered to watch him. At first, George argued with them, but they ended up helping him by giving him their clothes to keep him warm and bringing him food and water. However, one of the guards noticed that George was wearing extra clothes and reported it to the warden. The warden gathered all the inmates in the yard and demanded to know who had helped George without his permission. All the inmates stood together in solidarity, which angered the warden, who ordered them to stand in the snow all day. Shortly after, Gaga arrived and told the warden he was stupid for torturing George. He warned that if anything happened to George, he would take revenge. Gaga wanted George in good health because he was planning a rematch between George and Boyka. However, George refused, saying he wouldn't enter the arena again. Gaga told him he would remain in prison forever. Finally, George surrendered and agreed to fight Boyka in a fair match without any sedatives or cheating. He also asked Gaga to give new jackets to all the inmates who had helped him to protect them from the extreme cold. While George was training, Krot appeared and thanked him for the jacket. He then revealed that he had been a special operations officer in the past and could help George improve his fighting techniques to defeat Boyka. The preparations for the final match began, and George declared war on Boyka to prove who the strongest fighter in the prison was. During his training, George remembered how Boyka had defeated him with his devastating kicks, so he focused on training to counter them. Krot also explained that the source of Boyka's strength was his legs, and if George could break them, he would win easily. Over time, George's skills improved significantly, and he became faster and more powerful thanks to Krot's training. When Boyka's assistant spied on them, he became worried and told Boyka to prepare because George had improved dramatically. Boyka trained with all his might to show his full strength and prove he was the best fighter. Krot was playing music by himself when George surprised him by flipping a picture on the wall. George asked why Krot was trying to hide it. Krot explained that the girl in the picture was his niece, but he had been imprisoned before she was born. George didn't understand and asked how Krot ended up in prison. Krot explained that his brother had robbed a bank and gotten into serious trouble, so Krot decided to take the blame and go to prison in his place because his brother was married and his wife was pregnant. However, after being imprisoned, Krot tried to escape and accidentally killed a guard. He was also shot in the back, leaving him paralyzed. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison and would never get to meet his niece. Finally, the match between George Chambers and Yuri Boyka was organized, and all the inmates gathered in the arena. After the announcer introduced the fighters, George and Boyka attacked each other mercilessly. At first, Boyka was surprised because George had improved and started using his legs in the fight, even though he was a boxer. In the first round, George dominated and took Boyka down. However, Boyka's assistant then tells him to target George's leg because it's his weak point. In the second round, Boyka showed his true strength and moved with lightning speed, destroying George's leg and forcing him to limp out of the arena. Krot told George that he had to come back stronger or he would remain in prison forever. George remembered everything that had happened and gathered his strength, knowing he had to win and escape this cursed place. At the start of the third round, George was fully focused, and no matter how hard Boyka tried to dominate him, he failed. In the end, George grabbed Boyka's leg and used Krot's secret technique to break it completely, winning the match. Gaga was overjoyed because he had won millions of dollars from the bets. As soon as he saw George, he gave him a large sum of money as a reward. So George said that he will take revenge on him one day for what he did. But before leaving, he went back to the prison warden and said, "I want to make a deal with you." George offered the warden his financial reward in exchange for getting Krot out of prison so he could meet his niece. Krot couldn't believe what had happened and thanked George profusely for setting him free after all these years. In the end, Krot finally met his niece and hugged her with great happiness, while George left to return to his homeland after defeating Boyka, the most dangerous fighter in the world.